Before we begin, I want to take a moment to honor the cultures behind the stories we are about to explore. The tales shared here come from many peoples, lands, and traditions. I do not change these stories to fit modern expectations or to align with today's social standards. Instead, I present them as they were told, sometimes beautiful, sometimes harsh, sometimes challenging. We are not here to judge the past, but to understand it, to listen, to learn, and to honor the ancestors who carried these stories forward. We also share stories from various religious traditions. These are presented in their historical and spiritual context, with respect for their beliefs that they represent. Every culture deserves respect, context, and acknowledgement, and this space is dedicated to doing exactly that. Story 1. The Realm of Hades. Beneath the living world lay the kingdom of Hades, a realm so vast that the Greeks used the name of its ruler for the land itself. Though Hades was not death, and death was not Hades. Death belonged to Thanatos, while Hades ruled what came after, governing the countless dead who descended from sunlight into the world below. When a mortal died, the spirit left the body and began the journey toward the underworld, reaching the waters that divided the living from the dead. Ancient traditions did not always name the same river, for the geography below shifted from poet to poet, but the Styx, the river of hatred, and the Acheron, the river of woe, became among the most famous boundaries of the dead. There waited Charon, the grim ferryman who carried souls across the water, and later Greek and Roman traditions remembered the dead being buried with a coin so that passage might be paid. Those denied proper burial could be imagined wandering near the banks, unable to complete the crossing. Beyond the river stood the gates of Hades, guarded by Cerberus, the monstrous hound whose many heads became fixed in later traditions as 3. Cerberus did not merely keep intruders from entering. His more terrible duty was to prevent the dead from leaving. Once beyond him, the souls entered a kingdom that was not one single pit of punishment. Most of the dead existed as shades, diminished shadows of the people they had once been. And in Homer's Odyssey, even the great warrior Achilles told Odysseus that he would rather labor as the servant of a poor living man than rule over all the dead. Yet later traditions gave the underworld a more elaborate order. Some souls came before judges such as Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus. In different regions awaited different dead. The asphodel meadows received the ordinary multitude, neither exceptionally wicked nor especially heroic. The blessed might reach Elysium, or the Isles of the Blessed, where existence was imagined as gentler and free from the suffering of mortal life. Far below lay Tartarus, older and deeper than the kingdom of Hades itself, where the most terrible offenders against divine order endured punishments that never reached completion. There, Sisyphus forced his stone eternally uphill, only to watch it roll back down. Tantalus stood tormented by water and fruit that withdrew whenever he tried to drink or eat. The Danaids carried water in vessels that could never remain full. But the ruler of this enormous kingdom was not the horned devil of later imagination. Hades sat upon his throne as a king, stern, immovable, and difficult to persuade, ruling beside Persephone, who spent part of the year below after eating the seeds of the pomegranate. The dead belonged to their kingdom, and almost no one who entered was permitted to return. Orpheus came for Eurydice and nearly led her back to the light, but lost her when he turned to look behind him before they had fully escaped. Heracles entered and returned. Odysseus reached the boundary to consult the dead, but these were stories precisely because such crossings were extraordinary. For everyone else, the underworld waited beneath the roads, houses, temples, battlefields, and gardens of the living, an entire kingdom hidden below every human footstep. Filled not only with monsters and punishments, but with the immeasurable population of all who have lived before. Its gates did not need to hunt the living. Time brought every mortal to them eventually. Charon waited at the water, Cerberus watched the door, and beyond them stretched the kingdom from which, once the dead had truly entered, there was ordinarily no road home. Story 2. The 9 Levels of Mictlan. For many of the ancient Mexica, the destination of the dead was determined not by whether a person had lived a good or wicked life, but by the manner in which death had taken them. Warriors who died in battle and women who died in childbirth followed paths connected with the sun. Those claimed by water, lightning, and certain illnesses might enter the paradise of Tlalocan, the realm of the rain god, Tlaloc. But for those who died an ordinary death, the road led downward toward Mictlan, the land of the dead, and reaching it required a journey said to last 4 years. The dead were prepared to travel, wrapped for burial, for cremation, and given offerings for what lay ahead, because the soul did not awaken below to find its journey finished. It first had to cross the river, and there a dog might be waiting. In later surviving accounts, the dead needed the help of a Xoloitzcuintli, the hairless dog known today as the Xolo, to carry or guide them across the water. The dog that had known the dead person in life might recognize its former companion and help them pass, and so an animal that had once walked beside human feet could become a guide where human roads ended. Beyond the river rose 2 mountains that crashed together, opening and closing against one another, and the dead had to find this moment to pass between them without being crushed. Then came a mountain of sharp obsidian, its stone cutting like blades, followed by regions where icy winds stripped away what remained of earthly protection. The soul continued through places of flying arrows and dangers that tore at the travelers, through a region where wild beasts threatened the heart, and through waters or passages of blood before reaching the final darkness. The exact order and names of the 9 levels vary in the colonial sources that preserved them, but the journey itself remained one of ordeal, stripping, and relentless descent. The dead did not conquer these regions with weapons. They could not turn back toward the house where their body had once slept or call upon the living to reopen the road behind them. They moved forward because death had already happened, and every level carried them farther from the world they had known. At the end of the journey waited Mictlan Tetlutli, the lord of Mictlan, and Mictel Casidwal, the lady of the dead, rulers of the lowest realm. Mictlan Tetlutli was often shown with exposed bones, a skull-like face, and the signs of death upon his body, while Micteka Siwaddle shared the sovereignty of the underworld beside him. Their kingdom was not a courtroom where every ordinary person arrived to be judged for sin. Mictlan was the destination itself, the place reached after the dead had completed what the living could not travel for them. The 4-year journey ended only when the soul had crossed every danger and surrendered the last attachments of mortal existence. The living could provide offerings, ritual care, and remembrance, but they could not walk the 9 levels in another person's place. Somewhere beyond the river, the mountains still struck together, the obsidian still waited, the cold wind still moved through the darkness, and one by one the dead continued downward, accompanied for part of the road, perhaps, by the quiet footsteps of a dog who remembered them. Story 3. Kur, the land of no return. Beneath the cities of the living, beneath the field of barley and the rivers that fed the land of Sumer, there stretched a dark kingdom known by many names. The great below, the land of no return, and in some ancient texts, Kur, the realm into which the dead descended when their days beneath the sun were finished. It was ruled by Ereshkigal, the great queen of the underworld, who sat upon her throne surrounded by the powers and laws of death. No bright road led into her kingdom. The dead went downward, leaving behind the world where people ate bread, drank beer, raised chickens, worked the fields, and stood beneath the open sky. At the entrance waited the gatekeeper, Nedi, and beyond him lay the gates and boundaries of a realm that no ordinary soul could cross in reverse. Those who entered became Gidim, spirits of the dead, joining an immense population of ancestors, forgotten kings, warriors, laborers, mothers, children, and all those whose lives had ended before them. In one of the oldest surviving descriptions, the underworld was the house whose inhabitants were deprived of light, where dust was their food and clay their nourishment, and where the dead were clothed like birds in garments of feathers. Kings who had once sat upon thrones entered the same dark country as those who had served them, for death stripped away much of the power that had separated one life from another above. Yet the dead were not all remembered as existing in precisely the same condition. The care given to the body, the offerings made by surviving relatives, and the number of descendants who continued to remember a person could affect the existence of the spirit below. Those whose families poured water and made offerings might receive some comfort, while the forgotten dead, Those without descendants or proper burial could suffer hunger and thirst. The boundary between the living and the dead therefore did not erase every relationship between them. Families continued to care for those who had gone below, and restless spirits who lacked proper rights could trouble the living. Within the great below, Ereshkigal did not rule alone. The Anuna, great divine judges, were associated with the realm, while Namtar served as Ereshkigal's minister and carried the terrible force of fate, disease, and death. In later Mesopotamian traditions, Nergal also became ruler beside Ereshkigal, but the Dark Queen remained one of the oldest and most formidable powers of the underworld. Even gods who crossed into her kingdom could not ignore its laws. The dead could not simply climb back toward daylight because they regretted dying, nor could a living visitor enter without risking the same fate as those already gathered there. The great below took what came to it and did not willingly surrender its inhabitants. Unlike later visions of an afterlife divided neatly between eternal reward and punishment, the Sumerian underworld was the common destination of the dead. A person's life might have been glorious or humble, wealthy or poor, celebrated in song or known only within one household. But the road eventually turned plain, and families spoke the names of those who had gone before them. Below, the dead remained in the kingdom of Ereshkigal, dependent upon memory, burial, and the offerings that still passed from the lands of the living into the darkness. Kord did not need flames or endless torture to be feared. Its terror was older and quieter than that. It was the house everyone entered, the kingdom no walls could keep away, and the road whose ancient name warned every traveler before the first step was taken. The land of no return. Story 4. Yomi, the land of the dead. When the islands of Japan were still young, the divine pair, Izanagi and Izanami, stood upon the floating bridge of heaven and stirred the waters below with a jeweled spear, drawing up the land upon which their children would be born. Together they brought forth islands, mountains, rivers, winds, trees, and gods, until Izanami gave birth to Kagutsuchi, the god of fire, and the flames of the newborn burned her so terribly that she died. Izanagi mourned her and, unable to accept the separation between them, followed her into Yomi, the shadowed land of the dead. He traveled downward until he found Izanami within the darkness and called to her, begging her to return so they might continue the work of creating the world together. But Izanami answered that he had come too late. She had already eaten the food of Yomi and could no longer simply leave its kingdom behind. Still, because her husband had come so far, she agreed to ask the powers of the underworld whether she might return. But she gave Izanagi one command. He must wait, and he must not look upon her. Time passed in the darkness. Izanagi waited until fear and impatience overcame him, then broke a tooth from the comb he wore in his hair and set it alight as a torch. By its flame he entered the place where Izanami lay and saw that the wife he had loved was no longer as she had been among the living. Her body was decaying, filled with corruption, and from it had arisen the 8 thunder gods, terrible powers dwelling within the corpses of the dead goddess. Horrified, Izanagi turned and fled. Izanami awoke to the shame of being seen and cried that he had humiliated her. She sent the Yomotsi Shikome, the hags of Yomi, racing after him through the darkness. Izanagi threw down objects from his hair to delay them, and when his pursuers continued, he cast peaches at them, whose sacrifice power drove them back. Yet Izanami herself followed. Izanagi reached the Yomotsi Hirasaka, the slope between Yomi and the land of the living, and there he rolled a great boulder across the passage, sealing the road between them. Husband and wife stood on opposite sides of the stone. Izanami declared that because of what he had done, she would kill 1,000 people from his land every day. Izanagi answered that if she did so, he would cause 1,500 people to be born each day. With that exchange, the separation between life and death became part of the world they had created together. Izanami remained in Yomi and became known as Yomotsu Okami, the great deity of the land of the dead, while Izanagi returned alone to the world above. Yet he had crossed too deeply into the dead to continue as though nothing had happened. The pollution of Yomi clung to him, and he went to cleanse himself in water through misogi, ritual purification. As he washed away the corruption of the underworld, new gods were born from the act. including Amaterasu, goddess of the sun, Tsukuyomi, god of the moon, and Susanoo, god of storms and the sea. Thus the journey into Yomi ended not with Izanami restored, but with the stone standing between husband and wife, the dead and the living, while on one side death promised to take its daily number, and on the other, life answered by bringing forth more. Daily thread for July 11th, the Underworlds. Beneath the mountains of Greece, beyond the long and dangerous road to Mictlan, below the ancient cities of Sumer, and behind the great stone sealing the entrance to Yomi, today's stories reveal how often humanity has imagined death not as disappearance, but as a place beneath the world we know. The Greeks entered the realm of Hades, where Charon waited at the water, Cerberus guarded the gate, and the countless dead gathered in a kingdom almost no one could leave. The Mexica remembered Mictlan, where those who died ordinary deaths began a 4-year journey through rivers, crushing mountains, obsidian, freezing winds, and darkness before reaching the rulers of the lowest realm. The Sumerians spoke of Kur and the great below, the dark house of Ereshkigal where kings and laborers alike joined the dead, while the offerings and remembrance of the living could still reach those who had gone beneath the earth. And in Japan, Izanagi crossed into Yomi because grief would not let him accept the death of Izanami, only to discover that love could follow the dead to the boundary of their kingdom, but could not always bring them home. Though these underworlds were imagined beneath different lands, each placed something below the surface that could not remain among the living as it once had. Perhaps we have always understood the underground this way. It is where bodies are buried, where seeds wait before rising, where ruins disappear beneath new cities, and where we place the parts of ourselves we cannot carry openly through the daylight. Grief goes underground, anger goes underground, old dreams, abandoned names, memories we cannot bear to touch, and versions of ourselves we once needed but no longer know how to live beside, can all remain somewhere beneath the life others see. Yet the old stories warn that what is underground is not necessarily gone. The dead of Kur could still receive water from the living. Izanagi returned from Yomi carrying its pollution upon him. Orpheus nearly brought Eurydice back through the gates of Hades. Even the longest journey toward Mictlan began with the dead still carrying what the living had placed beside them. As tonight's fires settle into glowing embers, consider this. What part of me is underground? What grief, memory, fear, desire, anger, or forgotten versions of myself have I buried deeply enough to stop seeing, but not deeply enough to stop carrying? Perhaps not everything underground is meant to be dragged back into the light exactly as it was. Some things must be mourned, some cleansed, some remembered, some finally allowed to rest, and some may be waiting in the dark because we have not yet decided whether they are dead or only sleeping.